Hello, everyone, and welcome to Disability Voices United SDP Connect. My name is Christiana Morales. I am the director here of Self-Determination Program. Um, in case a lot of you might have been in the SSDAC meeting today, which is the state advisory committee of all of the chairs, and it went on very long today. And our special speaker today is also Rick Wood. He was the chair of that. So if we're a little fried today, you'll know why. If we forget what we're talking about or space out, you'll understand why. Today, we're going to be talking about employment and employees, scheduling them and how to interview them. Before we get started, I want to talk about our interpretation. We have interpretation in Korean and English. If you go to the bottom of your screen, there is a globe. You can select your language. Make sure, even if you speak English, to select English, or you won't hear a translation of questions that are asked in other languages. If you're on a cell phone, go to the three dots at the bottom of your phone, and that will take you to the part where you can select your language. So we're going to get started in just 1 second. As I mentioned, the SSDAC was today, and DDS did share their numbers. And so I wanted to quickly share my screen and let you know the hottest, latest numbers of where we are at in self-determination program. And here is my screen. They are not organized in any specific order. We will do another chart like we did before, where we compared to what percentage of their overall population they are, but I didn't have time to do it since the meeting ended. The total number is 2,688. So we are moving along. And so I'm going to leave it just for a second here in case anybody wants to look and find their regional center. And we can also, I haven't had a chance to do it, but we will post it. So you'll have a link later if you'd like to see it. So I'm going to stop my share again. So today we are going to talk about what you can and cannot ask your employees when you're interviewing. These were all questions when I was going in with my son. We'd never had employees before. So this I think was one of the more scarier parts for self-determination for us, because it was all new and we get lots of questions about it. So we're going to start with our own Disability Voices United Director of Administration, Monica Rejniak, and she is going to talk about kind of the HR pieces. And then after that, we're going to have an open discussion where I'm going to be asking questions of our three experts: Tim Jin, who is the co-director of empowerment programs here at Disability Voices United. You see him raising his hand. Rick Wood from Wood Law Group, and Sandra McElwee from Empower PCP. And what all three of these people have in common is they all run very complicated, very intense groups of employees. And they've been doing it a while, and they are experts in this. So we're going to learn from the best today. So Monica, are you ready to take it away? Oh, wait a second. We cannot hear you. Did you select your language? Are you in English? Can other people hear her? Is it just me?
I cannot hear her. So 1 second, Monica. I'm going to be hopping in the chat and asking you a couple of questions.
While they work that out, I will continue talking. So we did have our meeting today for the SSDAC. There were some interesting things that came out about it. And we will be following up. There were a couple questions that we're getting lots of questions about, which is the new employer burden with GT, which we will be talking about later and in future meetings. And they talked about that DDS is going to be doing some more data gathering on their own through oh gosh, I always get the two mixed up. It's not the CEDAR, it's the other system that they use. But they're updating their system to get more data at the DDS, as well as the committee has began a way for them to collect data on what is going on, which I think is important, that we're able to see what's going on with the program. Were we able to resolve Monica's, or we'll flip it over and do it the other way around if that'll help too?
I think that might be best, Christiana. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. We can just work with what we got. So if our other team would like to answer our questions, do we need to highlight them so they will stay at the top? Did you pin them?
I will do that as you introduce them, Christiana, so we don't
Okay.
have too many faces on the screen at once.
Perfect. Well, our first person is Tim Jin, the co-director of empowerment programs here at Disability Voices United. Hi, Tim. Our next person is Rick Wood from Wood Law Group. And our last person is Sandra McElwee from Empower PCP. Hello, everyone. So we had some questions that we put out to them. And so I'm going to just read the question and then kind of let them share their thoughts and perspectives on each of the questions. If you're in the audience and you have questions, please feel free to put them in chat, and then we will have a question and answer at the end where you can raise your hand if it's easier for you to ask questions that way. And we alternate between the chat questions and the raised hands. So welcome, hello. Taking a deep breath, might even take a sip of coffee here before we get started. So the first question we had was, how many employees do you have and how many backups do you usually have? Who would like to go first?
I'll go. So let me just take about 30 seconds to indicate that although I'm identified as a member of Wood Law Group, which is, of course, a law firm, I'm not here as a labor lawyer. I'm here as the parent of a 27-year-old who has been in the Kern Regional Center pilot for going on 24 years. In the course of that, learned a little about self-determination. As Christiana indicated, I co-chair the SDAC, which is the Statewide Self-Determination Advisory Committee. I'm the chair of the Kern Regional Center, LVAC, the Local Volunteer Advisory Committee, and I also serve in a number of other capacities, including on the DDS Self-Determination Advisory Committee, advisory work group. But I'm here not in any of those capacities. I only say that because we've been doing this for a long time, and it was approximately 4 years ago that in fact, this month, 4 years ago, that my son moved out of our home at the age of 23 and is only 1 mile away, but he's cared for by 8 caregivers, 24/7, 365. Prior to that time, we employed caregivers in our home, but it was time to move him out, and we were able to do that. I also have employees in my own law firm, so I know something about employing people. But specific to him, we have 8, and there are 168 hours in a week. So if you were to do a very straight, math or division, you would find that, each person works about 20 or 22 hours a week. Well, that's not exactly the way it works. The backup is the manager, who is a salaried employee and who is not paid an hourly. And if there is a backfill required, the manager and the manager's not able to find people who are available to, fill in when somebody's on vacation or sick or needs a day off or whatever. That person
How are we now?
that role.
I can't hear anyone.
As a practical matter, we have 8, and there's one who works only 16 hours a week. No, sorry, 8 hours a week. And there are some who work in excess of 30 hours a week. But the reason I say that is that we have found that if we can manage to find people who don't either want to or need to work a full-time job, something close to full-time provides the opportunity for flexibility that we otherwise would not have without getting into overtime. And so somehow we have made this work over these years. It's not perfect, but it works pretty well. And I attribute that to our decision a couple of years ago to actually place one of the caregivers in a management capacity so that he's able to be sort of the frontline person managing the other 7.
That's amazing. That's really actually helpful to hear how you are managing. Tim, are you ready to go? Okay.
I have about 8 or 9 staff, and 5 of them have regular shifts with me, and 3 or 4 of them are on standby whenever I need them. For those who are on standby, they have their normal jobs during the day, and I have to give them plenty of notice on when I need their help, but they are always available for me. They know when I'm asking them to cover a shift, either there's something wrong, or I'm planning a vacation and let's go have fun. My staff who have their set schedule with me, they too are on standby also. I have a main staff that does all of the scheduling with me. We work parallel together is finding backup solutions. Over the years, I've given more responsibilities to them because it can be very time-consuming, but most of the time, my team is more responsive to me because they know me and I know them. They always talk to me first when they are asking for time off, and then I talk to my main staff to figure out the schedule.
That's very helpful. And I'm seeing a similarity, right? Sandra, how do you manage your staff?
So my son has been living independently almost 7 years. And it's much easier now that we don't rely on agencies that may or may not send people, or they think they've sent somebody and they still don't show up. So he has 7 staff with regular schedules. Some of them only work on Saturday. One of them only works Friday night, and the other one works Saturday night. And I say night, like 5 o'clock to 10 o'clock, and Saturday night and Sunday night. So I find the part-time people also to work out really good, just like Rick's. I've got 1 full-time person, and she is also the staff manager. There's 2 of the part-timers that will fill in for other people. So there's 9 altogether, plus 1 IHSS staff. So I guess there's 10 altogether. And we have a group text. So if anybody needs time off, then they put it on the text and everybody responds whether they're available. Somebody responds whether they're available or not to cover a shift.
I think that's really interesting that you said it's better than when you were using traditional system vendors. You find the same thing too? Yeah. How about you, Rick? Do you find it's better than traditional?
Well, it's been so long, 23 years that I don't remember that. And really, I mean, seriously, he was only 3.5, almost 4 years old when we began to receive services following his diagnosis. And so because I live in a rural area, there are no agencies. So we never had that comparison. And when he was younger, obviously he lived at home. We cared for him. And as he became older, we had caregivers and so on. But one of the things that strikes me, having listened to Tim and Sandra, is that we are making this sound easy. Anybody who's ever employed anybody knows it is not easy to have employees. And when you have someone who is entirely dependent, so for example, my son cannot be left alone for a minute. The person who shows up has to be be replaced by a person in person, right? You can't just say, well, okay, I'll be there in 5 minutes and go away and expect that somebody's going to show up. And so it's really very critical. And although we worry about it, the timing, because sometimes people are late, and I live in snow country. Sometimes people can't get here on time or at all this winter. And so it requires a lot of flexibility and a lot of patience. But the couple of things that I've heard from Tim and from Sandra are that if you have people that have the opportunity to be flexible, right? Meaning to fill in, that's really helpful. And if you have people who need a full-time job, that's great, because there's 168 hours in a week. And then the other thing that was so important that Tim said was the reason that he does this well is that he communicates with his manager. The reason that it works for Sandra is there's a group text. We have both. We have the same thing. In fact, we have charting, such as you would see in a hospital. And so we've created a chart because my son is not verbal. So literally everything that happens, including what he eats and what his mood is, and whether he has a seizure disorder, whether he's had a seizure and that sort of thing, it all goes into this chart. And what they do at the end of each shift is they take a photo and text it to everyone else in the group. So everyone in the group knows exactly what happened during the period, during the previous shift or during a shift. And it allows us, of course, to be engaged as well without hovering over people at his house. And then last but not least, Tim alluded to it, he says he gets along with his caregivers. No, these guys, everybody loves each other. You can't do this without loving the person that you are caring for, and the person gives that love back. And so that's the way that you, make it easy. It's never easy, but that's the way that you make it easier.
Well, I love the idea of them texting the chart. That is such a great idea. You kind of actually answered my next question, which was, how do you schedule them, and do you use an app or paper schedule? So Tim's ready to go for this one.
My main staff and I do the schedule a month in advance. If a staff member needs time off, it gives us enough time to figure out a solution for backup. The same goes for my schedule. I give enough time to my team on what I'm doing on most days, and if it's something out of the ordinary, like going to Disneyland, I let them know far in advance that we are going out that day. This helps all of us be on the same page, and if I have an engagement to go to, this helps my team know when to be at my house and the dress code for the day, because my team is my shadow when I'm working, and they are also my communication partners. I know most people like to schedule their team weekly, but I find that to be too difficult, and it also shows no structure for the team members that they can call out whenever they want, other than emergencies. When scheduling staffing, we use Homebase to let them know when they are working. It's an app on their phones. I also use Google Calendar for internal use to see who worked which shifts. It helps me keep track of when I used overtime or emergency rates.
That's great. Sandra, how about you? Do you have what's your scheduling methodology?
We have regular shifts. So there's a Monday through Friday, 40-hour-a-week person, 9 to 5. And then we have 5 o'clock to 10 o'clock is the next shift. And that depends on the person, depends on the day of the week, who that is. Fridays and Saturdays, Fridays from 5 to 10 and Saturdays from 4 to 10, we pay more. than we do the other days, because who wants to work Friday night or Saturday night? So that, and actually we have people clamoring to cover those shifts when people want out because they make more money. And then, the overnights are covered by IHSS. Somebody asked that question, and my son has a live-in aid, and the live-in aid is paid with the IHSS funds overnight. And the live-in aid is not there on Friday nights and Saturday nights. We have another person who's also paid by IHSS who comes in to cover the Friday night, Saturday night. So his live-in can go shack up with his girlfriend for the weekend. But we also have a daily checklist of things that need to be done. And the staff does a really good job of communicating with each other if something wasn't done on their shift that the next shift needs to do. Usually chores that my son kept avoiding doing.
Sandra, I have a question about that. If you have somebody from 5 to 10 at night, and then you have somebody coming in at 9 in the morning. Wait, no, you have somebody overnight, right?
Yeah. Yes.
And is that's the IHSS person?
And he lives there. He's a live-in aid.
And so he's working 9, 10, he's working 11 hours, right?
Yes.
How do you
And that's
handle?
IHSS. So
Okay, so the overtime rules don't apply then for?
I don't know. I mean, we didn't have that much IHSS when my son lived at home. He may be getting overtime. I mean, you're allowed to have 10 hours a day, I think, for IHSS. And if it's, 2 hours from 10 o'clock to midnight, and then 8 hours in the morning, he actually leaves at 8. So my son has an hour where he gets in trouble before his 9 o'clock staff shows up. Sometimes he's ready for work when she gets there. Sometimes she has to start from scratch, but he does have an hour unsupervised each morning.
So I know this is probably going to come up, and sorry, Christiana, but I'm tagging on to what she has to say. So the way that we do it, we have people with 18-hour shifts, and because they can work 9 hours without having to pay overtime up to 45 hours a week, and because of the type of care they provide. And so we will have somebody, for example, from 3 to midnight is a day, and midnight to 9 is another day. And so we avoid the 18 hours in the attendant overtime by splitting it into 2 days. And it works out really well because if somebody wants to work 36 hours a week, they simply pick up 2 shifts, and they've got the other 5 days to either work another job or to do whatever they want to do. And so because of the way we've been able to structure it, we have happy people. And in particular, because our son is like all of us, or most of us, sleep. He doesn't always sleep, but theoretically he sleeps at night, right? So there's not a whole lot to do during those hours, let's say between 9 o'clock at night and 6 o'clock in the morning. But there has to be somebody there in the event that something goes wrong. And so these are things that we have learned along the way as he's gotten older, and as we've implemented this, and that has allowed us to try to find something that fits within the law, that doesn't just ruin us with overtime, and still keeps people and still has we still have a pretty regular schedule. In fact, it's very regular, other than when people need time off, want time off, and often they will do these trades of time between themselves, which is handled by the manager. Sometimes I see him every day for a few minutes, every day. And so sometimes I'll go in and I'll think, well, you're not supposed to be here, because I don't know. They just handle it, right? So long as there's somebody there, they handle actually being there without our having to have any supervision. And it's just a godsend, because it's a challenge, as we all know. And that's how we've been able to sort of maintain our own sanity.
And I think that fits to our next question, which is, what do you do when someone calls in sick at the last minute? Oh, Tim, do you want to comment on the last one or this one?
For IHSS, it's 40 hours a week and then overtime. It's not after 9 hours a day. Anything over 40 hours a week is overtime, not after 9 hours a day for IHSS.
There you
Thank you.
go.
Thank you, Tim. Yeah, Sean's living aid has been with him almost 7 years. So he's he went through college, paid for his college and his living expenses with free rent, plus getting paid the IHSS, getting paid to sleep basically, except for when my son decides he's not sleeping, and but most of the time, it's a pretty good gig. When did you just ask about when someone calls in sick?
Sick at the last minute. What do you?
So sometimes the person that's on the shift before stays, and then there is overtime, and we do have overtime in our budget. Sometimes, and what'll happen, let's say somebody else says they can cover, but it's going to take them an hour to get there because they've got to wrap something up, then that person before will stay for an hour. And worst case, there's always mom.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So in our instance, if somebody calls in sick, that text goes out to 8 other people plus us. So there's actually 10 people on the text, and so sometimes there is that scramble. And as you guys know, I mean, during COVID, when people really were sick a lot, or they had been exposed to somebody who was sick, and we didn't want to have him exposed, but the bottom line is that when you have this great relationship among all your providers, and there's this constant communication, my son's name is Davis, and they are called Team Davis. The entity is Team Davis, and they really are a team. And so what happens is, if nobody can fill, or all of a sudden everybody goes silent, right? It's us, it's we who fill in. And so, and quite frankly, we don't mind, because you see, our child is no longer living with us, and so we miss him. I mean, and so for somebody to call in at the last minute might, mess with our schedule to the extent that we can have him. We're happy to have him either at his house or at our house. And so it's just like anything else. You just got to find people to fill in, and the default, or the ultimate backup, is the parent.
Start calling other staff members to see if they can come in. If my main staff can't come in, I reach out to my natural support. No matter how much preparation you do, it's never enough. I'm always scheduling in my mind and figuring out solutions when I know that I have something coming up, and let my team know as soon as possible to avoid any confusion.
Yeah. I think some of you might have already answered the question, but the question was, is your staffing stable? Do you have a lot of turnover, and how long did it take you for you to kind of get, it sounds like all three of you have kind of a setup going, something that's working for you. How long did it take you to be able to establish this thing that's working?
So while Rick has Team Davis, my son has the Sean Squad. And the first year was a little rocky, because I wasn't that great at hiring people. And I hired people who really, were looking for a job, not a relationship. And it just didn't work out. And we want our staff to have a relationship, not just with Sean, with each other too. And so it was a learning curve. But by the time year 2 started, well, we're almost up on year 3, and we have had no turnover this year, which has been great. We've actually added people. So we've got people clamoring to be on the Sean Squad.
Yeah. So you asked the question about how long did this take? Well, first of all, the grand experiment just continues because there's a labor shortage. And what we have found is that, there's so many different components. One is, can you offer a good working environment where people actually want to come care for somebody? Well, that takes a special person. Second, can you afford to pay whatever rate you need to pay? Well, competitive rates, let's just use it. And they're different for every community, but we know we're in an inflationary period and we have a labor shortage, and so costs have gone up. But three is, Sandra, you hit it. You develop a relationship, not just with the child. The person, my child is not a child anymore, he's an adult child. Not just with the person that you're providing care for, but with all of the others. And that doesn't mean you go out and socialize, or that your family goes on a picnic, or you go have a drink together. It's what you have in common. And so we are really, really aware of that. And it took us a couple of years to really kind of get this. And then last but not least, I had a note down on my pad, which is they've created their own network of contacts, so that, because there's always employment changes. And we had somebody who had a job opportunity that was a really good one for him. And he because we had a network, we actually were able to fill that spot. So it's just like any other employment arrangement. You just got to take care of your employees and hope that they show up, because it's not like you can just turn the lights off and lock the door and open your business the next day. If there's nobody there, somebody has to always be there. So we worry about it a lot, but the reality is that you got to create a team, and that takes some time and some management.
Since I started self-determination, my staffing has never been this stable. I've had very few turnovers, and the majority of my team has been the same since the first day. There are some staff members that haven't worked out due to various reasons, but when staff leaves on good terms, we always give them the option of being a backup.
That's great to hear. One, I think Tim would be really fun to work with, because it's Tim and he's pretty funny. The other thing I know, Tim, is you do a lot of, you go on vacations, you go a lot of places. How do you schedule your staffing when you're going on vacations? And do you have to pay the full 24 hours where they're gone? Like what? And do you, do you pay for their food and lodging and transportation? What happens if you go on vacation?
Since I am a planner, I plan far in advance to figure out staffing when I go on vacation. For example, next month, I'm attending a wedding for a friend, and the ceremony and the party is not close to me, so I would probably have to spend the night. Before I figure out what to wear and what I want to get for my friend, I always figure out staffing first and then go from there. That is always my main priority in whatever I choose to do. And my second priority is to figure out overtime for them, and one of the solutions that works for me is when a regular staff wants to go on vacation with me, we come up with a solution with my team to have another staff member cover the other person's shift before I leave on my trip, to avoid as much overtime as possible. It can be complicated, but not impossible, because there are apps out there that calculate overtime for you, and the FMS portal is very helpful. When I travel, I pay everything for my staff. All expenses are paid by me and not from my SDP budget. Fortunately, I have the best team helping me, and sometimes they get the food bill, but I don't expect them to pay for anything. I am very grateful for my team, and they know that I'm very generous. My staff rarely pays for anything, even especially when we are hanging out with my family or even with my friends, because they don't see any of my staff as a paid help. I give all of my staff the opportunity to travel with me. My needs are different than when I'm at home.
That I see why it takes so much planning. As you're explaining it, the fact that you're a planner in advance, I see why. Rick or Sandra, do either of your loved ones, have they traveled or?
Well, my son is about to go on a second cruise with his staff, and he's been to Las Vegas with his staff. It helps when the staff is a guy because they could be in the same room. But both cruises has been female staff, so they have their own room. And yes, we pay for, all expenses for the trip. Because we're paying for all expenses and they're having fun too, we just pay them 10 hours a day. So they do have 2 hours a day of overtime. And, my son is in the next room. So if anything's needed overnight, but he's usually pretty exhausted, so he's not messing around on those trips. But when he went with one of his staff to Las Vegas, we paid the mileage the whole way to Las Vegas and back, which was a nice bonus for him because that was pretty decent mileage. And I take that back. We do 12 hours a day, not 10. So there's 4 hours that were overtime. And we do perks in the month. We have a budget for each of the staff. So if they want to take my son to Boomers, for example, they can pay for themselves at Boomers too. They want to go miniature golfing, the movies. We have the movie pass for one of the staff. That's the unlimited movies each month. He gets mani-pedis. So his staff gets mani-pedi when he does too. So we do things like that I hope help. Help them feel loved because they definitely are.
Sandra, is that something you pay for or self-determination pays for?
Well, I guess self-determination pays for it because I get paid for doing person-centered plans. But no, self-determination does not pay for that. That's my money that I put into that. So, but trust me, it's worth it. I mean, my husband's about to retire. I've already been on 3 vacations this year and I've got 2 more planned. And I could not do any of that if I didn't have the reliable staff that my son has.
So that's where I want to come in because we're talking about up to this point vacations where you actually take your child, and Tim's talking about vacations where he takes staff. So the other kind of vacation is where you don't take your child, so having that stability is great. But then the flip side is if you do and you employ one person to be with him and you pay him 12 hours or whatever, the question is, well, what happens to the other 8 or 7? Do they get paid for the shifts that they miss? And we learned the hard way. I don't know why I didn't think that it would be a hardship, but I didn't. My son, as is often the case, has medical issues. And so sure enough, he's life flighted out of here, which happens because I'm in a rural area, and he's taken down to San Diego and things are complicated. And so he's gone for 3 weeks. And so the question then becomes, well, and we're with him for 3 weeks. I was in and out. My wife was with him for the 3 weeks in the hospital because he can't be by himself. So the question becomes, well, what do you do about keeping people? Well, you have to pay them because if you don't, you lose them. So we lost somebody that she didn't want to go, but she said, look, I can't, I have to support myself. I learned that the hard way because we lost her and we were very happy about having lost her, but we got her back. So it worked out just fine. But it was a really good lesson, which is if you're an hourly employee and you're working a fast food restaurant and you don't go to work on a Wednesday, you're not paid on a Wednesday. If they don't put you on the schedule, you're not paid, right? If there's nothing to do, you're not paid, you're sent home. But in this instance, where you've got critical care people that you're dependent upon, and more importantly, who are dependent upon that expected paycheck every week or two, then you got to pay them. And so we have done that, and quite frankly, they're grateful. They're grateful for it.
So, and it's interesting because you guys talked a lot about its team, they become like part of the family. But talk to me about establishing boundaries. So, and training new staff as they come in. Do you have, they aren't family. So how do you figure out where that place is? Oh, Tim.
Yeah, Tim has got direct experience and can communicate. I'd love to hear from him.
Many of my team has known me for many years, even before I started SDP. It's always tricky with friends because I need their help when they are on the clock. Establishing boundaries is hard, more so for me than them. For example, I have staff who likes the same thing as I do. Sometimes we go out as friends and they are off the clock. It's always difficult for me to ask for their help when they are not scheduled to work, but we are going to see our favorite bands. Of course, they won't leave me hanging and let me pee my pants or let me starve, but for me, those are my hardest boundaries. My staff who are my friends, they can care less because they are there for me no matter what.
Did anybody else have thoughts about boundaries and training staff?
Yeah, so I'm looking at the chat. There's a lot of questions about, so that it's clear. Yes, we are paying people when we're away. So if I take my son on vacation with me and we're gone for a week, right? We pay it's not a set pay, it's a set schedule. So if their schedule is that they work 20 hours that week, they get that pay. And I think one of the questions was, well, who funds that? Well, we built it into our budget. We don't take him on a lot of vacations together. He's severely disabled, he's severely impaired. And so it's not practical in many instances, but the point is that you have to pay them something related to what they would otherwise work, because that's what the expectation is. Boundaries are seriously important. When you have a person who does not speak, it's like having a baby who doesn't speak, and you have to be on it. And so if there's a bruise, there's a text that goes out. What's going on? There's a bruise on his arm. What happened here? He can't tell us. If there is any evidence of inappropriate conduct or behavior or something that is abusive, when we hire, we run through what our expectations are in a very, very firm way. And we consider ourselves as mandated reporters. We're not mandated reporters, we're parents. But we make it very clear that this charting is really important. So if somebody has a day and doesn't put that there's a bruise or that he fell, for example, right? And then the next person comes and says, there's a bruise on his arm. Well, everybody, then addresses the bruise on the arm. And so it's sort of, I don't know whether it's vigilante like or, but we have to, because he can't tell us. And so as far as training is concerned, it's the manager that shadows a person, or that person, I guess, shadows the manager first. And then the manager will then shadow the person and keep close tabs on that person, because the way it is that he's not in our home. And so we don't know, we don't have a prescribed menu, for example. We have lots of menu suggestions, and the manager actually purchases groceries, and my wife makes food to take over to him. So there's always something there, but we leave it to those caregivers to basically provide the daily care within their discretion. And that means determining, we know what he likes. And he likes most things, so it's not very hard. We know that he takes a shower every day. We know because he's incontinent that diapers need to be changed, that Depends need to be changed. Everybody knows all these things, but the way they go about it, because everybody lives differently. So we just basically put out some very basic rules and a schedule by saying, look, he has to have breakfast in the morning, and he really needs to have lunch. He really needs to have dinner, and we would really like him to go to bed at 9 o'clock. And that's unless there's some reason why he shouldn't go to bed at 9 o'clock. So you set those parameters, right? And then we give everybody the flexibility, latitude is the word I'm thinking of, to decide really what they're going to do. We make suggestions. Today, he should go out for a walk, ride his bicycle, a tricycle, ride the trolley. We have a bus system, which is a trolley system. Go to the mountain and participate in disabled sports. Whatever, we make a lot of suggestions, and so they get incorporated into his routine, because otherwise it's good. It's pretty boring. You can sit around all day and watch SpongeBob if you want to, but that's not really good for the caregiver, nor is it good for our child. And so everybody knows what's going on from the previous person, and we're making it sound like, oh yeah, this is just really routine and easy. It's not. I mean, you set all that up, and then you bring people in to conform to whatever the standards, protocols, rules are. And then the purpose of my going over to his house and my wife going over to his house, independent of one another, every day at some point in the day, is to open that door and get our eyes on him. And that occurs unless we're out of town, and that's how we try to handle the training and the boundaries issue.
I think that's a really great point that I hadn't really thought about, of just they're going to know there's going to be unexpected visits all day long, so it just keeps everybody on their toes, which I think is great. So our last question, you guys have already given us just an enormous amount of information, but
wait, I have something to add.
go ahead.
About the training for staff. So my son has ABA, and we have the ABA provider train his staff. When we first start, I spend 2 hours with them, now I'm having my staff manager do that, but going through things to know, he can't have sodas or he gets diarrhea. And that's the first thing he does when he has a new staff, is say, let's go get a soda, because he thinks he can, they don't know. And so we go through all that. So there is training, and we do team buildings. I try to do them every 3 or 4 months, where we get everybody together, and we'll do like a review of things that maybe have come up that need to be reviewed. And then we do something fun. Like we went to an escape room once, and we have a Christmas party every year with a white elephant gift exchange. And so anyway, go ahead.
No, I think those, in fact, it kind of goes into my last question, which like suggestions you have for people who've never hired staff before. And I like the idea, the team building, the parties. I think those are really, really great things to think about. You don't think of as somebody who hasn't hired staff before.
Well, my advice is, don't just hire the first warm body that comes along. You want somebody who knows what they're getting into. You don't want to sugarcoat anything. My son can be a total asshole. And so people have to know that, and know not to take it personally. So that I developed a list of questions to ask them to kind of figure out, and I don't want somebody who's done this before. That was the problem my first years. I had people who had worked as support staff before, and they had all the bad habits. So that was my mistake the first year. I don't want anybody who's ever done this before. I just want somebody who wants to have fun and And it's important to get my son out of his condo. I do not want him sitting home all day on his video games. And anyway, just big thing is don't let them be surprised by anything.
Tim, really seemed to approve of the don't use trained people. And I think that that goes against what most people would go out and do. That's yeah.
Finding new people that want to help you is really hard. I've had much better luck by word of mouth than a job posting. Instead of explaining what my limitations are, my friends look out for me and tell their friends what I'm capable of doing. No one wants to hear the job's duties first. That comes after the perks. You would be amazed how many people want to help you by word of mouth. Friends, asking friends, and so on. It's a cycle of building up your circle, and you have to remember that there is no perfect person out there, and sometimes you don't match and need to let them go.
Yeah.
That's just another great point. There is no perfect. I subscribe to the 90% rule. If they're 90% as good as we are, and his health and safety are not endangered, good. And sometimes, the little things can get in the way. I don't look at the little things. I have a person who is a vegetarian. He will not feed my son anything with meat in it, right? So he works on weekends. So on Monday, we take over all these things like meat lasagna, like chicken enchiladas. So that by the time he gets there on Friday night, those are all used up, and he can do the vegetarian thing, because obviously I want my son to have protein and all that. But my point is you just sort of adapt. And so somebody in the chat said, do you use an agency's platform to train? No, it's our platform. We develop the platform. It's our rules. It's what we do. And then we train around, or I train to it, I guess. A couple of other questions in the chats I wanted to get to, and that is, do we have cameras? Remember, my son doesn't speak. We do, and we tell them. And the cameras are located in two very specific areas: his bed, in the bedroom, and in the living room where he sits on the sofa, his place where it's his place. So there's no privacy issues. We're not, and nobody's offended by that at all, because we're not intending to have anybody on camera except for him. Secondly, somebody asked questions about vacation benefits, sick leave, and the like. Well, California has sick leave requirements up to 3 days, 24 hours. And that's 1 hour for every 30 worked. Obviously, we subscribe to that. We also provide vacation days paid, and we provide well, those are really the two big ones. We give a small bonus at the end of the year, actually twice a year. What we haven't done, but because we haven't need to yet for just our circumstances, if we have not funded health insurance, but it's something that I worry about every year, and budgets are so large, I worry about having to add that expense. But as a practical matter, and I'm looking at the chat, who pays the bonus? It comes out of our budget. We budget for overtime, which we don't have hardly any of. We budget for a bonus, but in the end, here's how we handle so we don't go over budget. My wife and I pick up hours. When somebody gets sick, we want those hours. And so, if somebody doesn't show up and they've got a 10-hour shift, that's a couple of $100 or more, actually, that we're not paying. Obviously, we're not paying ourselves. And so that frees up money to pay for some of this stuff without actually having to ask for it. And there's one last thing I really wanted to get in. As we know, in self-determination, there is the sole employer and co-employer model. We are sole employers. We make all the decisions. And I just want to tell everybody out there, because I see there's 140 people on this call, that unless there's potential liability for employing people. I mean, there just is. There's workplace conditions, workplace harassment issues. There are overtime and hours worked issues, and so on. And because I own and run a law firm, I have employees, and so I know something about employment, but I don't know. But I'm not an employment law attorney, but I know enough to know that if you are frightened about that, my advice is that you ought to be in the co-employer model, where you've got an entity that is taking on that potential liability. That doesn't mean, as a co-employer, that you're not out there looking for staff, and that you're not doing the interviews, and that you're not creating doing the management of them. It simply means that you've got somebody else to do the crazy work that you got to do in order to have employees and make sure that the taxes are deposited and all the rules are required that are required of employers are followed. So that just happens to be my bent. And unless you're in that game or you know something about it, I think it's a really hard thing to be just a sole employer.
I want to jump in because there's one piece I do want to make sure people understand. In co-employer, because the FMSs are the employer of record, whatever their benefits are going to be your employee's benefits. So most of them will not permit you to give bonus or vacation days beyond what they offer in co-employer. In sole employer, you have the choice of bonuses, vacation days, those kind of things. So it's something to think about. You won't be able to choose those if you do co-employer.
Well, you can if you want to pay for them out of your own pocket.
Actually, we're being told no.
Really?
Yes, because they need well, you didn't hear that from us. but they for their employees, they need it to be fair across the board, and so they can't get additional things from different people. So that's the line that
Good point.
right. I want to make sure we get to Monica's presentation before we get to the questions. There's some amazing questions out there, and you guys I cannot even tell you how much great information was in there. And I think everybody appreciates it so much. And we can tell by all the questions. We're going to have, there's Monica. Monica just popped up. This is
Can you hear me this time?
We can hear you. Yay. This is Monica Rejniak. She is our, you are director of administration, and she is the one who understands all of the hiring pieces that you might have questions about. So she's going to do a presentation on it, and then we're going to open it up to questions, because I know there's tons out there.
And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So I'll just set that up very quickly.
That makes sense. That makes sense.
And make sure I can share. Is there a problem with me sharing?
You should be able to share, Monica.
Okay, thank you. I see it now. Thank you very much. And while I'm getting my screen set up. All right, I think we see it. Y'all see the interview questions screen?
Yes.
Okay, let me just get a couple of these 57 tabs out of the way so I can see the chat. Most importantly, I will do my best to follow along. So first of all, thank you everybody for helping me troubleshoot. I don't know what happened. I was all good when I came on early to get myself set up correctly, and then it all went to pot. So oopsie. So thank you for your patience. So what we're doing is going backwards a little bit, because we've heard Sandra and Rick and Tim talk about their wonderful, well-oiled teams. So that takes constant care and nurturing. And what I'm going to do is go back to the interview process. I'm not going too much into where to find staff. I saw a lot of great questions about that, and I've heard a lot about networking and whatnot. So going on from where to find staff, we're going to move on to, you finally have some staff applying for your job. Let's talk about interviews. So to back it up, I'm Monica Rejniak, and I have been interviewing direct support professionals, caregivers, assistants, staff for the past 15 years in different settings. If I happen to miss any SDP specific information, I have all these other experts here to fill in the gaps. The purpose of my presentation is to ensure that when we're interviewing, that we are compliant with California's many legal requirements. There's a lot of state laws in California. And not only to be compliant, but we want to ensure fair and legal interviews. So to do this, we're going to talk about protected classes of people and what that means. We're going to review a few common questions about what we can't ask, common questions that we can't ask, focus on what we can ask, and then make our informed hiring decisions. Some of the words I heard when you guys talked about your teams were that you have a lot in common. You talked about male versus female staff. And so some of these characteristics are important, but what we want to do, and the purpose of what I'm going to go through, is to try and take our bias out of our interview questions and focus on the specific needs of the individual. So the first thing you want to do is set yourself up for success from the start. And in order to do that, you need to evaluate yours or your loved one's needs, right? If you're Tim's staff, you're going to need an adventurous person. Sounds like they're going to have a pretty consistent schedule. If you're somebody else's staff, there might be a lot of gaps and there might be a lot of need for coverage. So you might need someone who's more flexible. Again, starting with evaluating the job requirements. And then you want to base and develop your questions on the needs of the individual being cared for. Next, you create the job posting based on the needs of the individual. So we're not going to say, I need a male caregiver who has things in common with me. You know, as much as that's what we want to steer clear of these things. The job posting needs to include the requirements of the job, especially if you need somebody to have reliable transportation or speak another language. You put that in the job posting, and the job posting allows you to ask some questions, such as things like language, that you might not be able to if it wasn't in the job posting. We'll get to that in a minute. Evaluate, create, ask. Ask your questions in the interview based on your loved one's needs and stick to them. And what I mean by stick to them is repeat. You need to ask each applicant the exact same question every time. If they're interviewing for one position, maybe it's a direct support professional, each applicant, you have 10 applicants, needs to be asked the exact same questions. And that's not easy, especially in in interviewing. We ask a lot of behavioral questions, meaning, tell me about a time when, and so we're allowing someone to elaborate. So we're developing rapport, we're learning about the applicant, and this relationship is growing, which is wonderful, right? Because a lot of what we're looking for is fit in our team. But remember, there's plenty of time to build on those specifics and learn more about that relationship later. But initially, your goal in the interview process is to focus on the same questions and find that right candidate. So why are certain questions prohibited? So one, it's against the law. California state laws aim to prevent discrimination and protect applicants' rights during the interview process. Two, to eliminate bias and focus on qualifications and ability, right? We're not trying to focus on someone's inabilities, disabilities. We want to know, what can you do for my loved one? So steering clear of prohibited questions, it's designed to help us eliminate bias based on race, gender, religion, age, disability, marital status, sexual orientation, and a handful of other protected characteristics that we're going to see shortly. Excuse me. So if we try and eliminate our bias, again, we're bringing the focus back to the candidate's qualifications and abilities. Another reason certain questions are prohibited is just because we need to eliminate lawsuits. No one wants to deal with an expensive lawsuit. So if you ask certain questions, you expose yourself to potential legal consequences such as discrimination lawsuits, and you don't want that. So basically, we're working hard to keep bias out of the interview, allowing you to focus on the candidate's abilities. And the bottom line is that whether we're the interviewer or the person being interviewed, we all deserve a fair chance and a pleasant interview experience. Protected categories. There's a big list of protected categories in California, and different states have different protections and groups. So this is California's list of protected category. A protected category represents a group of people that have historically been negatively impacted by discrimination based on things like race, gender, color, ancestry, national origin, religion, creed, age, 40 and over, disability, mental and physical, sex, gender, including pregnancy, childbirth, breastfeeding, or related medical conditions, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, medical condition, genetic information, marital status, military or veteran status. It's a comprehensive list of things that you don't want to touch in the interview process, because the bottom line is those aren't the reason that you're hiring. The reason you're hiring is to fill a specific need. So it's important to be familiar with that list. Consider ways to work around these questions, and we'll explore that in the next couple of slides. So again, bringing it back to our goal as interviewers to find out if an applicant can fulfill all of your support needs. You, as the interviewer, will make the final informed hiring decision. You're just trying to remove the bias along the way. Okay, so this is kind of an ask this, not that type of slide. I have two of these slides. And these are some questions that we cannot ask in an interview. And what I want to think about with you is the reason we're actually asking them, and then come up with a legal way to get the information we need. So the first one, how old are you? Well, consider why you need to know this information. Does someone look really young? And perhaps you need to know if they're 18, and if they're under 18, maybe they need a work permit. So it's not that you need to know how old they are, but you need to know, can you legally work? So again, we're focusing on our needs. We need someone to legally work. So in that instance, you want to ask someone, are you legally able to work? But if you want to know if someone is 65 because you want to hire an older woman because it reminds you of your grandma who's always been a wonderful caregiver and all her kindness, that's when it's not allowed, right? We're bringing all of our bias into it. Next question, where are you from? Where are you from, right? So this is prohibited because you're asking about their ancestry, their national origin. And the bottom line is it doesn't matter where someone was born, where someone lives currently or previously. But what do you need to know? Why are you asking where you're from? Perhaps you or your loved one has transportation needs. Perhaps they do a lot in the community. And really, what you want to know is, can you get around my community? Where are you from doesn't give you that information. Perhaps you want to know if they're legally able to work in the United States. So you could ask, are you legally able to work in the United States? Every employer asks that question, and we all need to come to our employer with our documentation showing proof of identity and proof that we can legally work in the United States. So steer clear of the where are you from and stick with what you're really trying to get at. How about, what religion are you? Do you have a church you attend? So some of these sound like, I would never ask that, you're thinking. But I've worked with people who were very active in temple, who were very active in their youth group. And so when I was hiring for those staff, I needed to understand if someone was comfortable in those settings. So in those instances, I evaluate, what do I really need to know? I don't need to know what religion they are, but what I need to know is, are you available? Are you comfortable taking my loved one who participates in Wednesday youth groups and needs someone to go to church with them on Sundays? Are you comfortable in that environment? And can you provide the support needed in that environment? So that's different than wondering what religion they are, right? So in that instance, maybe you're just going to ask them if they're comfortable in this situation. So we're steering clear of the religion thing. If it's your preference that someone is of your same religion, rethink that. Is that your need, or is that the need of the person being taken care of, right? Next question. Do you own a car? Well, why are we asking if someone owns something? You start getting into personal financial stuff. And while transportation may be a job requirement, it should be put into the job description. That way you can simply say, do you have reliable transportation? Because you don't really need to know if their name is on the title of the car and how many payments they have left. What you need to know is that they have reliable transportation and that they're going to be able to take you or your loved one where they need to go. Next slide. Couple more questions, couple more of the ask this, not that. I love your accent. How long have you lived in the US? Okay, so I can't imagine anyone doing this, but people say some crazy things, right? So we need to take our natural questions out of it and think about, what do you need to know? What are you asking? So you can't ask, where are you from, or how long have you lived in the US? Because you're touching on national origin. You have no way of knowing where they're born, and honestly, you don't need to know. But maybe what you want to know is, again, are you familiar with the area? Can you get around on public transportation? So ask that. Are you familiar with the area? Can you get around on public transportation? Next question. You're using a cane. What happened? Are you temporarily injured, or is this going to be like a long-term thing? Okay, something you can't ask because you're focusing on an individual's disability. And what you want to ask is, what you want to do is describe the requirements of the job. The person I'm hiring you to work with needs personal assistance getting out of bed. They need help with bathing. So of course you might question whether somebody with a cane or an injury is going to be able to safely support your loved one. So what you want to do instead is describe the functions of the job that need to happen and ask them, are you able to perform the essential functions of the job with or without accommodations? That's what you want to get at. Next question. How'd you learn to speak Spanish? So language is tricky, because if language is a requirement of the job, then it needs to be in the job posting and you can ask about it. But if it's not a requirement of the job, then you might be going into unsafe territory, because what you might be wondering is, are they a citizen? You might have some biases coming out. So instead of asking someone, how did you learn to speak Spanish? What you want to do is talk about the requirements of the job, should be in the posting, and let them know they're going to need to read and write Spanish and communicate with the family. Are you able to do this? So it's just a matter of asking the specific needs and not just a really general, relaxed question. So it goes back to the planning and the creating the questions in the first place. What if? So you're in the interview process. Again, a lot of these questions you're talking through and you're listening to someone talk about the experience. So what if a candidate leads the conversation in the direction of protected groups? So the candidate says, I was a stay-at-home parent for 7 years. My partner went to school. And during that time, I learned a lot of time management skills. So what that person's trying to share is their time management skills. But now you're learning personal information that needs to be kept out of the interview. So as much as you may be interested, don't ask about the ages of their children. Don't ask where they go to school, because then you might be fishing for information about the candidate's availability, their potential time away from work. You may know, oh, they go to that school every Tuesday. They're out at 1 p.m. I need this person on Tuesday. That's not for you to figure out. Instead, what you need to do, if this applicant has led the conversation into an inappropriate place, you want to lead it back to safe territory. So you may say, thank them. Thank you for telling me about the gap in your resume. How have you prepared to return to work outside of the home? So just lead it back. And that's a lot of interviewing, is being in charge of the conversation and leading it back so you can obtain the information you need. What if you, now that you know all the categories you can't talk about, what if you accidentally ask someone an illegal question? Don't panic. Simply acknowledge it, apologize for it, and move on. Interviewing is a skill. It requires practice. It requires revision. Things change. More categories come. But remember that unintentional mistakes happen. But how you handle those mistakes is what truly matters. So wrap it up here. I want to thank you all for your attention and your patience. I appreciate that. I hope this presentation has been informative. Perhaps I've left you asking more questions than you had initially. We can talk about that. Just remember, conducting interviews in a fair and legal manner takes practice, but it is the key to maintaining a diverse and inclusive workplace. Remember to focus on an applicant's qualifications, skills, and experiences directly related to that job, so that we can have these wonderful teams like Tim and Rick and Sandra. Treat all candidates equally. Ask them the same questions regarding the requirements of the job, so that you're ensuring a fair interview process. But always remember, the final decision is yours. Who you hire is always your decision. So with that, it's 5:50. We've got about 10 minutes left. So I will open it up to all the questions and hand it back to Christiana, because I know we had some previous questions before I hopped in here.
That was amazing. Thank you so much, Monica. And it was so helpful, because I learned a lot from it, because there were things that I'm like, oh, I think I did that just thinking I was being chatty, and I shouldn't be doing that. So
that's the hard part, is you naturally are just engaging with people, but there's time for that later.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you so much. We did put links for the slideshow in both English and Spanish in the chat. Ed, I am going to leave it up to you. I know people have been chomping at the bit to get some questions in.
Certainly. And before we get started, I just want to remind everyone to avoid crosstalk and to speak at a moderate pace. That's not only to our speakers, but to anyone who might be verbally asking a question. So we have a whole bunch of questions, folks. I am going to try and condense several of them so that more folks can get their questions answered. We have a lot of questions about vacation, Christiana, and in particular, our interpreter Helen has given us one from the Korean community. When you go on vacations, is that going to be covered by SDP budget, or is that just going to cover the staff's scheduled hours? And a bunch of people have asked similar questions in the vein of, what does get paid for when you go on a vacation? What should I be looking to cover if I'm covering anything out of my own pocket?
Wow, I can say there isn't an easy answer to this one because there never is, right? Tim and Sandra, please jump in if I am incorrect in this. If you look at the directive that came out and talked about goods and services, it really specifically talked about things that were not permissible. And one of them was purely recreational. And so some regional centers interpret this a certain way and some do not. So I will tell you, there is no one answer for this. DBU's stance is that what that says is that if you pay for somebody to go with you, then that person should be paid, and whatever their entrance fees are should be paid. Remember, federal funds cannot be used to pay for food. So that is always going to be an issue, that you cannot pay for food with self-determination program. And so then it kind of gets into, Sandra has her hand up, so I'm going to see if she has some more to add to this.
That's true. You could only pay the person's wages. And everything else, I mean, we pay for their meals. We pay for, the cruise, the cruise is being paid for by us for his staff. Thankfully, all meals are included on the cruise. So if they go to Disneyland, we pay for the Disneyland ticket. We do have one staff who has a Disney pass, which is nice, but that's, we pay for all the expenses. And if there's, most of the time they'll bring their own food for dinner. If there's an event and there's food being, prepared for the event, or let's say Sean is going out with his friends and the staff person is going to support him, we pay for their dinner at those situations. Because it's not really cool to bring your box lunch into, a nice restaurant or whatever.
I pay for everything other their wages.
So I think that pretty much answers the question. Question, Tim is there, so he can pay for it. Sandra, how do you give them a card so they pay for it? Do you hand them, how do you actually handle the actual payment piece?
My son has a prepaid debit card because he was pretty good at overdrafting his ATM card all the time. So I transfer the funds to his prepaid debit card and he just pays for it.
And he pays for it. Okay, that's good to know. Okay, Ed.
Okay, folks. So our next question is from an anonymous question asker who would like to know about the FMS employer burden rates that are changing July 1st. Does that mean that participants have to change their spending plan?
This is a big question. It's kind of not related to our topic today, but I know it is on everybody's minds. I will tell you that I have reached out to everyone. I am talking to everybody. We are trying to get some definitive answers about this. What I will say is that at this moment, I wouldn't have everybody running out and changing spending plans until we know for sure where this is going to land and what's going to happen. So it is we were just in the SSDAC, which is the statewide meeting, And Susie Rakeworth from DDS said that she knows about this. It's on the top of her list. She is working on it. So that would be my recommendation, is sit tight. And I know that's a horrible, it's not what anybody wants to hear, but I think at this moment, I wouldn't go making any changes just yet.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Christiana. I have another, and again, sort of, this is a question that several people have asked, sort of different versions of. A lot of people are asking about, how do you deal with overtime? Do you plan ahead for it and put it in the spending plan? Does that come out of pocket? If I want to take a vacation every year, should I just put that in my spending plan as far as the hours I'm going to need for that? How should I deal with overtime?
So
All overtime's budgeted.
yes, so plan ahead. And Tim said he's a big planner. Sandra is a planner, and your independent facilitator should be helping you think these through as you're looking at your annual budget of the things that you might want. Keep a buffer in there for that overtime, because things come up. People get sick, don't make your budget so tight, your spending plan so tight that you don't have room for this. Make sure you do plan for it ahead. Sandra, you want to add to that?
We have in the spending plan a line that says overtime, and it's and we calculate out, if there's going to be a 1 week long trip, or a couple of weekend trips and things like that. And then we also have, I just have 2 hours a weekend for overtime, which some weeks you won't use any, but some weeks you might use a lot depending on if somebody calls out sick. So that usually averages out for the year for the sick pay. But then there's extra for the trips. And we kind of know in advance what trips are going to happen in the year.
Mm-hmm. Tim was nodding his head, so I think that he was agreeing that
That's exactly what I do.
you plan ahead. Ravi has had his hand up, so I would love to let him ask his question, and we are just about out of time.
Yeah. Hi. Sorry. I had a question. I've had some bad instances where I had people take care of me and they did a really poor job. And then one time when I was in the airport, the cops attacked me and they put me in cuffs and then took me to a mental hospital. It was so bad that my parents had to hire Irving police to fly me out to LAX. That's how bad it was. And I was asking if any of the people that have these challenges, whether there's a physical or a mental disability, if they've ever suffered something like this to them when they were traveling, if they didn't have their staff.
Oh,
That's
Ravi,
why my son has staff.
yes, I'm so sorry that happened to you.
Yeah, that's
and
awful.
so hopefully the reason you have staff is so things like this don't happen. So I really hope that you get the support that you need so things like that will not occur again. And I'm really sorry that happened to you. Ed, how are we doing on time? Do we have time for one last question?
One last question. I'll pick one. Folks are asking about salary. So will DDS pay for, or will your spending plan, will a regional center pay for a salaried employee if you plan ahead for it when you put it in your program? A lot of people are saying, I would love to have a manager the way that Tim has described he does and the way that Rick described that his son Davis does, but it sounds like I'd need to pay a salaried employee. Can that be done in the SDP?
I mean, absolutely. You determine the rate you're going to pay and you determine the hours that are going to be paid. So now I think what they're asking is, would these not be, what do you call it? Monica can probably think of it off the top of her head, where you don't get charged for overtime, right? If you're a manager, you don't get charged for overtime, I think is what.
Exempt employee.
Thank you. That's
Sorry.
exactly what I was trying to come up with. And that I would have to ask the FMSs because I'm not certain.
And we are at time, so I will toss it back to you, Christiana.
Thank you everyone so much for coming. I hope that you learned something new here. I know we didn't get to everyone's questions. We will be back in 2 weeks. Bring your questions back to us then, and have a wonderful week. Thank you all.